Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Fight for Our Freedom Radio. And I'm your host, Bad Baby. And tonight we have with us Michael Steinbacher, and we are going to talk about catastrophic geology. All right, then. Welcome to the show, Michael. How are you this evening?
I'm well, Bad Baby. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, well, anytime. We love being educated out here on Fight for Our Freedom. Oops, having a little audio problem. Okay. Well, for those that don't know anything about you, why don't we start at the beginning and explain who you are, what you're a little bit about what you're about, and any websites that anyone can go to for you.
Sure, I can give you a quick overview. There are videos on YouTube that cover this, but I do this every day to strangers that I meet at Starbucks and in parking lots and weird places. It's based on legend. And there's a book, Worlds in Collision, from 1950 by Dr. Emanuel, which covers these legends. But this work was not unique to him. Many others who came before him had the same feelings, that there were catastrophes as described from around the world. He made them more electrical and brought them up to date. But the basic concept is that Venus was a giant comet about 3,500 years ago, give or take. The date's not important. And it was incandescent. It was shining in the daytime as bright as the sun. It had a huge tail. And it threatened the Earth every 52 years. That's why there's 52 weeks in a year. That's why they do sacrifices every 52 years with virgins and things in order to prevent this from happening.
Okay, Michael, did you move your phone because you sound a little bit distant now?
Is that better? The microphone was a little bit further away. Now it's closer.
Yeah, it's a little bit better.
Good. So, again, this is not just a Hebrew story, Exodus. This is from India, China, Scandinavia, Peru, Mexico, Oklahoma. There are even Egyptian versions that are very similar, where Pharaoh chases the slaves and drowns in his chariot in a whirlpool. So there's a lot of confirmation from all over the world. And what's described is basically the plague of darkness, where there's dust so thick you can't see your hand. You can't recognize the person standing next to you. The first 3 days are utter darkness. You can't see anything. For 3 or so days afterwards, it's really bad, but it's getting a little better. While this is happening, there are electromagnetic events going on, storing the dust that's in the air, heating it, making it melt, causing gravel, rocks, and boulders the size of large trees to fall from the sky. While this is happening, there's a flood caused by a reversal of rotation of the earth. And again, if it was just Hebrews that said that the sun used to rise in the west, there'd be a tendency to ignore it. But when everybody else agrees, then you look at the Hebrew version for the details. The idea is if you hit an electric magnet with an arc, you can reverse the polarity. If the magnet is spinning like your electric meter, a homopolar motor, and you reverse the polarity, it will break, slow down, stop, and begin to spin in the other direction. With the Earth, this might take some time, but there are consequences. Because of sea level at the equator being 68,000 feet higher than the poles, if you remove centrifugal force, you get a rush of water to the poles, causing the rivers to run in reverse, as described in legend. And the people who describe this wouldn't know that there's a bulge of water at the equator. So that makes it kind of a better description. So while this dust is coming down, you have rivers running in reverse. The Colorado River is flooding. It's drainage. The water is going the wrong way, all the way up to the Rockies, the Rocky Mountain National Park. It's being injected with water and dust and sediment, filling the valleys with thick layers of sediment. It gets even stranger. In Mexico, they say that it rained oil for days and nights.
Where did the dust come from? Did it come from space?
Probably a combination of the tail of the comet. Comet tails go out for millions of miles. Comet Venus would have a tail of dusty plasma that would go for probably many millions of miles. And being the size of the Earth, the tail would be monumental. So an electromagnetic event in between the comet and Earth would attract the dusty plasma incredibly rapidly.
Well, are you familiar, Michael, with the postings that are being put up with people in the Texas region that are finding like a red dust on their cars in the morning?
I'm not familiar with that right now. I know it happens in Miami when they have dust storms in Africa. Mm-hmm. The winds blow across the Caribbean east to west, and it can make dust in Florida. But yes, you can get that. This would be way beyond that. This would be enough to create mountains in a blink of an eye. I have YouTubes that show what happened over the southwest U.S., and I believe something happened over Afghanistan. And it appears, and I hate making this big. I want it to be embraceable and just everybody's happy. But it appears these events, the one in Afghanistan created the Himalayas and the Alps, the Gobi Desert and Sahara Desert. It appears the one over the southwest U.S. created the Canadian Rockies going all the way up into Russia with an arc of volcanic islands, Bering Islands. And then you have a mirror image of the Canadian mountains running down through Mexico into Venezuela with the Caribbean coming back, another arc of volcanic islands. It's all a mirror image. I have a YouTube video on this. Mm-hmm. It explains it, I think, fairly easily. People who look at the images and then compare them to a barred spiral galaxy, which is what electricity does, because barred spiral galaxies are electrical, and they take on a shape similar to these shapes. So it seems as if these mountains were made in a day, a week, a month. It's hard to say for sure, but when the people came out of their caves from sheltering, they claimed that the old mountains were gone and there's new mountains, and we knew the Earth so well, and it's different, it's changed, and we're going to have to get used to the new one, and it might be bigger. Things seem to have grown in place, which doesn't do much for Pangea and continents bobbing about. I believe that the Americas grew, even South America was an extension of this, and I believe that Asia and Europe and Africa grew during these events. And again, there's oil raining from the sky. The oil that we find today is in river systems that run into lakes. And there's trillions of barrels in these lakes. The biggest one is the Green River Basin. I have a YouTube video on that. Just north of I-70 in Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming is 4 trillion barrels of oil, more than half of the world's proven reserve. And up to half of it almost up to half, might be recoverable. This is more than Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, all of the rest of them combined, in 3 lakes, as if the oil ran down a river into the lake and then got covered up with dirt. That's described by people who live there. The Mexicans are describing what they're experiencing. So you have all of these details pointing in the same direction, that these descriptions aren't crazy people. They're really super intelligent. They can do math, they can build cities, they're clever, and they're describing it to the best of their ability. The Hebrews say the rocks were hot. In Mexico, they say that the rocks were red hot falling from the sky. That gives you a chance to make rock without needing a volcano or igneous solutions. You have red hot dust from the sky that can make layers of rock, cap rock. All the different rocks that we see seem to be the result of this process where the dust was molten. And a geologist would never consider this because it's crazy. You don't have an option for molten dust other than a volcano if you're a geologist, unless you've read Worlds in Collision. So it's just an entirely different way of looking at the utter geologic process. There's nothing in common with what they teach in universities. Nothing. Not one thing that they teach would be correct under this scenario because there's no time. There's only 3,500 years for erosion instead of billions. There's no time to move mountains from place to place, skipping across the desert, 60 miles here, going up, going down. There's a magic elevator that geologists need to impose because their starting point is incorrect and they've got a blank check. They can do anything they want in terms of moving things around, but if you make it complicated and make it hard to pronounce, nobody will question you. Garnets, some garnets in the Himalayas they start at the surface as sediment, and then they require 120 miles of depth, maybe a little bit less, up to 200 kilometers, and then they come back to the surface again to be found close to the surface or on the surface, where electricity can make these garnets in the air. There's something called a Z-pinch or a Bennett pinch in plasma physics. It's a short circuit at a Berkeley current, which would attract material, squeeze it, and compress it more than gravity could hope to do. So you can make a garnet in the air with plasma physics, and then you don't need a magic elevator going on a 240-mile round trip. And anybody who proposes a 240-mile round trip want to step back and look at what they're proposing. If a young child proposed that, they would say you're insane. But somehow, if you have a PhD in geology, you can impose a 240-mile round trip, and everybody's afraid of you. But I'm not afraid of them anymore.
So, the oil that you say that was raining from the sky, are you saying that all of our elements are coming from space? Because I kind of think that's true, because I watched a documentary on the History Channel about the forming of the Earth, and they were saying we had no water and that the water came from the meteor striking the planet.
It could be. The key to the oil is NASA has gone to Comet Halley, and they've flown through the tail of the comet, and they've looked with their spectrometers at all of the inner comets, and they all have hydrocarbons, just like the oil in oil shale. Every one of them. I have NASA links that talk about it. It's so convenient. Every time I go to NASA and look for something about comets, it answers a prayer. It's unbelievable. It has dolomite, it has oil, it has calcite, calcium carbonate. It has everything you need to explain the geologic column, olivine, all these different elements, including oil. So all of a sudden you have a source of oil. The Earth might even be able to produce this in electrical events itself, but comets do it naturally, and they have a tendency to store it up as they travel around the sun. So there's a chance that it accumulates, and there's a chance that Venus was rich in oil, and it rained down as described. When the Russians first got to Venus, they claimed that they found hydrocarbons. And ironically, a few months later, I have friends who think that this supported Velikovsky so intensely that they changed the story and said it was sulfuric acid instead. That seems like a big mistake. But people don't like Velikovsky. If he's right, they're wrong about so many things in science. So he's been attacked and misquoted. You can read horrible things about him. They're usually based on misquotes. But yes, there's oil, hydrocarbons in all of the inner comets. 100% from articles from NASA, a released mission by NASA. And graphite. If you image a comet far away, it comes out graphite, carbon. Now you got carbon and you throw in some hydrocarbons, you got coal. And you have these layers of coal that match all the other layers of sediment, as if the coal came down from above. And comets fit the bill. They explain it. And these layers are fairly high up. It doesn't look like it's coal from vegetation being squeezed together as proposed by geologists. It looks like it's extraterrestrial. So we just happen to have the ingredients required to explain most everything. And I have links on all of these things. Most of my videos have links underneath. Sometimes you have to click on read more. All the links aren't exposed unless you click on read more.
Yeah, that's where I found you on YouTube. I started watching some of your videos, and I thought a lot of the things that you were talking about were very interesting.
They're so far out. I wish that they weren't. They're so different.
Well,
but
we go for far out on this window.
I fit in here, huh?
Yeah, you fit right in with the misfits.
The descriptions are such a clue. They're trying to tell us what happened, and then when you go out into the desert, and I've been doing this for almost 7 years now. I've been an itinerant, mountains in the summer, deserts in the winter, almost continuously. And I had theories that I had to abandon because eventually the rocks disagreed with the theories. And if your theory disagrees with the rocks, your theory's wrong. You have to back up, admit it, and go, oh my God, I misconstrued what I was seeing there. This is a more logical explanation. But the rocks are Trump. And I take others out, and lots of them have PhDs, and they see what I'm selling. And it's not subtle, and it doesn't take long. And after a few days, they'll kind of shush me. And it's like, well, I got it. You don't have to explain everything again. I see what you're saying. Leave me alone. Because they can explain it to other people after a few days. It's almost impossible not to see it. It makes driving around very different than before you became familiar with these ideas, because you can't turn it off, and you see it everywhere you go. And it's part of the hydrology, the drainage, because there was a flood going on, the molten rock, more so in some places than in others. Laughlin, Nevada to St. George, like in Vegas in the middle, is really intense. You can see such wonderful things there in such a short period of time. It's where a couple of vortices, I think, bumped into each other. And you get a double layer in between the vortices, and it's where all the energy is stored. But there's places like that where everywhere you go, your jaw just drops. It's one thing after another that fits this model of deposition from above during a flood.
And this is going to happen again, isn't it, Michael?
Unfortunately, we live in a really messy neighborhood. And this isn't the only one. There were things that happened prior to this that concerned Saturn and Jupiter. And they were messy. We had a different system, different gravity. There were no days, no nights. It was a nice, benign place to live. And that system broke apart. It might have something to do with the flood of Noah. There's models that say that a hydrogen cloud came towards Earth and mixed with the oxygen in the atmosphere and created water and produce less oxygen, which kind of changed the people. That's an option. It's not in stone, and it happened long before the Venus events. You then have Venus and Earth having two encounters over a 52-year period. The first one is a lingering encounter. It's not just one thing and it's over. It's described in Exodus. It goes on. There's incredible events at the Red Sea. 3 months later, there's incredible events at Mount Sinai. 52 years later, there's an event with Joshua where they're having a battle with their enemies, and rocks from the sky kill more of their enemies than their swords. That's kind of the end of the Venus-Earth events. But then according to Homer and many other witnesses from around the world, Mars and Venus do battle 4 times within sight of the Earth. And they're watching this. And it's scaring them. And they're building pyramids to protect themselves from Mars, Venus. Because there's events on Earth, nothing like the mountain building period when Venus was a comet interacting with Earth. But they're horrific. After that, at the time of Isaiah, 700 years after the events of Moses and the plagues of Egypt, again, worldwide, you have 4 events between Mars and Earth. More electrical, less dust. They don't talk about a plague of darkness where you have material available to create mountains. The sun is not quite as bright as it normally is, but it's not a plague of darkness. The plague of darkness explains the material availability. So there might have been adjustments to the mountains and the valleys during the Mars-Earth events, or even the Venus-Mars-Earth events, but nothing like the mountain-building, geology-creating period of the Plague of Darkness. Again, worldwide, not just Hebrew. Everybody has this. So that's what gives you the confidence. It's not just one group. It's so many with the same details and the same chronology. They're even spaced the same way they describe them. Again, adding to confidence that it's historic. If it's historic, you got to listen and go, gee, this would leave a mark. This would do something. I'm with a group called the Electric Universe, and they seem hell-bent on everything being removed. There's something called electric discharge machining, which can remove material with electricity. And that became the prime mover for the explanation of the celestial bodies. But when you read Worlds in Collision, you got all this dust, and you got wind beyond hurricane, and you have flooding and all the other factors. There's going to be a process of addition. At times, there's subtraction. At times, there's canyons being excavated electrically. But that material that's being excavated was created with dust from above, and maybe again some from the earth that got set up and came back down again. There's the gentleman in Georgia named Billy Yelverton, and he uses dust and electrodes, like a lot of electricity, and he's recreating these processes, sort of simulating exactly what I'm proposing, and it's making what you see in the desert. It's like a dream that he's doing this. Ben Davidson, Suspicious Observers, did an interview with me, and there's a video of Billy Yelverton. It's right in the middle. It's so perfect. He's removing material from a base. It's going up, and it's repositioning itself in circular mountain chains to scale with mountains in the desert. So it appears electricity, electromagnetism, this is not dust, but dusty plasma. You have to get a background in the electric universe, plasma physics, to understand the difference. It's really a big deal. Thunderbolts Info has beginner's guides to the electric universe that are really special and simple. They're not equations for the most part. And if I can understand it, chances are anybody can understand it. I'm not the sharpest knife. I'm just perceptive and observant, and I can read. And I'm kind of tenacious, I guess. But yeah, I know the legends. I studied plasma physics. Some of my friends are the leaders. And then Google Maps helps you to see the patterns which would otherwise be invisible. Google Maps terrain in particular allows you to see the patterns. I like to say that I wouldn't be talking to you right now if it wasn't for Google Maps, which is, 10, 11 years old. It was required, along with the understanding of plasma physics and electricity, and then applying them to the legends that seem pretty solid.
So the Grand Canyon was not formed from water?
It didn't erode anything. The idea is the Colorado River drains a fantastically large area, almost everything west of the Rockies in eastern Colorado drains into the Grand Canyon. The Green River, the Gunnison River, the Colorado River. And the river would always follow the lowest point. That's what rivers do. If you go up from one side of the river or the other side of the river, it's always uphill. So the idea is the river's there to start with. And you have a flood. And then you have some places during the flood that are a little bit higher than others. So those places are going to start to grow as the dust comes down because they're sticking up above the flood. If the water drops into the flood, it gets washed away. Billy Yelverton just did a video on this that really simulates the Grand Canyon formation. And there's water involved because he made a trench in a plate and had running water. And I was begging him to do this to see if the water would prevent accumulation, not erode a canyon, there's running water. And as these events transpire, you get dry areas growing, but the places with running water keep washing themselves clean. So I usually have to say this 20 times to people as they nod their head up and down for the first 19 in agreement, not engaging the gears in their brain. Just going, yeah, okay, the canyon's prevented. It's not eroded. But everybody has this erosion model in their brain going, well, it must be eroded.
Well, that's what they teach you. Even when you go there and look at them, they say that it was eroded.
Yes. And it's, I happen to have 2 YouTube videos on the Grand Canyon. If water was going to erode something, it would not erode through the mountain. If you go to the south and east of the canyon, it's 1,000 miles lower to get to the ocean. So why would a lake back up and then erode over the top of a mountain when the water can go around a much easier path? It doesn't make any sense at all. It's kind of crazy. And then when you look at Billy Elderton's video, and you see how he has electrodes on either side of the drainage, and he starts the experiment, and you can see water accumulating on either side of the electrodes. It's like, oh, that's interesting, because the water's not doing this in the other areas. It's staying dry. He's got the water running perfectly. And all of a sudden, you know that this wet area on either side of the drainage, where the electrodes are, starts to get higher and higher. And by the end of 15 minutes, there's a canyon that to scale is probably a mile deep. And there was never any erosion. Nothing was ever there. It was just moving water while dust is coming down from above. The dust seems to be moisturized by this process where the drainage is, and it's growing in a flat nature so that the layers of sediment are horizontal, just like the Grand Canyon. I have a friend from Germany. We went Grand Canyon once. How come the layers are horizontal? I don't know, well, maybe it's because of slosh and it was wet flood that came over and it was full of sediment. But then when you look at these videos, it's like, no, the material was wet from the air because the water seems to be pulled up from the river, and you get these flat layers just like the Grand Canyon. I asked Billy if I could use the video he sent me, and he asked me to wait. He's going to do something better. He's got so many plans for fine-tuning these experiments. I'm like a child at Christmas waiting for these things. It's like a dream.
Well, I can see your enthusiasm in your videos, that's for sure.
I used to be passionate, now I'm obsessed, but I'm pleased.
So do you feel that this planet Nibiru is headed at us and this will happen again?
I'm not a real big fan of Nibiru. I don't think it's required. I think much of what's described as Nibiru are actually these events. And people need to stake their own claim. So it appears to me that Nibiru was lifted from the events with Venus. And then you throw in some black holes and this and that, and it gets complicated. But it's not required. And if Nibiru did something 12,000 years ago, I can guarantee you that if Venus had the effect that I think it had during the Plague of Darkness, those events worldwide, nothing on the surface of the Earth would reflect Nibiru. Everything on the surface of the Earth reflects the Venus-Earth events.
So do you think these pictures that are people are taking of this object on the side of the sun is Venus?
Well, Venus is Venus. We know where Venus is. It's not a mystery. I'm not familiar with the things on the side of the sun.
Oh, well, you can look it up. Even China and Russia on their news, on RP News, they're actually talking about Nibiru and talking about the two suns because it looks like two suns.
Well, the idea is there's hardcore descriptions describing Venus as being as brilliant as the sun during the day. This caused Dr. Velikovsky in 1950 to predict that Venus would be hot. Every single textbook said that Venus would be 25 degrees because there's no radiation getting to the surface. There's no light on the surface of Venus from the sun, all of the light is blocked, which means it should be cold. They went there and their satellite melted. And then they tried to say, well, Velikovsky didn't say it was that hot, and yes, he did say it was that hot. And it's still cooling off from being a freshly born comet. So you don't need Nibiru to be a second sun. You got Venus. And then you have people doing artwork of Venus shining through its plasma here. It's on the petroglyphs all over the world. I believe these petroglyphs were done after the Venus-Earth events, while people were watching Venus-Mars from the Earth with electrical events coming down to Earth during this period of time. I think that's when Squatterman actually happened. And that's where you have 2 million of these petroglyphs of Squatterman. I think while people were sheltering in mountains because of Venus-Mars, they're afraid. They haven't repopulated the Earth yet, but they're working on it. According to my friend Andreas Otte, who's into archaeology and the shortened chronology, he feels that all of the cities that we find today, the ancient cities, start off as being Neolithic, with nothing underneath of them. There's no city, there's nothing, because everything's been covered up. The cities prior to Venus, Earth, are no longer available. They're buried way deep, thousands of feet, maybe miles. So the people come out and repopulate with Neolithic cities, primitive pottery, primitive metallurgy. The glazes aren't real cool. And then they rebuild that city. It's destroyed either in catastrophe or just age. And they have better technology, better metallurgy, better pottery. And then that city is replaced with one above it, much more modern. And then the people remember their technology and they start making primitive pyramids, and then modern pyramids, and then really modern pyramids and temples. All of this post-Venus Earth. So nothing we see in the temples and the pyramids has anything to do with Moses. This all happened later. And there's a memory of these events with Moses, if it's historic and he's a real person. Maybe he's Venus. It's hard to say for sure. But those things happened earlier, and then nothing we have access to is from prior to that. Again, 1500 BCE, approximately 3,500 years ago, Venus, Earth, he has the cities starting about 300 years later as the population grows, and then within a relatively short period of time, civilization is flourishing. But they're under stress because of Venus, Mars in the sky doing all these things. They're building pyramids as fast as they can for god kings. After the Mars Earth events, Hezekiah, Isaiah, there's no longer a need to build pyramids. There's no longer a threat in the sky. There's no longer a sword of Damocles hanging by a golden thread. So they stopped building pyramids. But up until that moment, the gross domestic product of the world was applied to building pyramids. In the Americas, they got more than they do in Africa. So people were building shelters. The Great Pyramid is a wonderful shelter. It's designed for one person. There's 2 air holes. If you close them up with steps coming up into the main chamber, it's watertight. It's actually able to prevent a flood from coming up to the chamber as long as it's airtight. You don't want a bunch of people sharing the oxygen. If you're Pharaoh, you want it for one person, which is kind of how it's designed. All of his family and his slaves and his toys are in other pyramids. But it makes sense as the ultimate shelter from stuff falling down from the sky. It's the most stable structure on the planet, and they weren't used for burial. They're used for life, for survival. It's really different than the burial model.
Okay, I have a caller that called in, Mark. Do you have a question for Michael? Hello, Mark?
We've lost Mark.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe he walked away from his phone.
I hate it when that happens.
Okay, well, go ahead, continue then, Michael.
Okay. It's just that we have all of these details, and when you look into it, everything can be answered simply with this. I love to talk about dolomite. Just west of Las Vegas are the Spring Mountains. They're covered in thousands of feet of dolomite. It's called the Bonanza King Formation. It's primarily unfossiliferous, without fossils. According to geologists, it was 500 million years ago or 600 million years ago to the west of Las Vegas, but this was under the ocean. And the dolomite accumulated over millions of years to be thousands of feet thick. And then, over more millions of years, it was thrust on top of the Spring Mountains west of Las Vegas, somehow or other, without fossils being part of the matrix. There's fossils on the surface and underneath it, but not the rock. It doesn't make any sense. And according to chemists, dolomite doesn't precipitate out of ocean water. There's no place in the world where dolomite is accumulating on the bottom of an ocean today. Even in the Caribbean and places that would be best suited for it, no dolomite. In lakes a little bit, you have a tiny bit, but it can't explain 1,000-foot thick formations. So if you Google dolomite problem, you'll get page after page. According to the chemists, the only way they can get dolomite to precipitate out of ocean water is to heat the water between 100 and 200 degrees centigrade, boiling rapidly, and fill it with uric acid, urine. As I like to say, picture a bunch of dinosaurs standing around in boiling water, urinating all day long, trying to justify this model. It doesn't make sense. But Comet Halley, according to NASA, has 7% dolomite. And this dolomite would be separated and organized and concentrated by the electromagnetic events that are taking place. And it's deposited at the very tops of the mountains. The Dolomites in the Alps are the very tops. And you can see the direction the wind was blowing in. You can see the cliffs. The cliffs are leeward. Windward is like a water ski ramp. It's a nice flat layer after layer building up. But the material can't stick to the leeward side. So the leeward side becomes a cliff. So if you go to Google Images and just search Dolomites, Italy, don't do anything about cliffs or anything else, you'll see the most beautiful pictures. And they're all showing you the cliffs because the backside, the windward side, is boring.
So what kind of wind velocity are you talking? You're not talking 80 miles an hour.
This is where the word hurricane comes from. These winds are so far beyond hurricane, it's hard to describe. People couldn't stand up. They had to be in caves. This is wind beyond your wildest dreams. Take Hurricane Andrew and multiply it.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about. And that gives you the ability to have all of these things happening rapidly. And all wind, every single bit of wind on this planet is produced electrically. None of it's thermodynamic from what I can tell. Maybe there's a little bit of thermodynamics involved.
That's why they use electricity for HAARP.
Yes, and that's why high pressures north of the equator spin clockwise and low pressures spin counterclockwise, and vice versa south of the equator. It's an electrical system. And in between the powerful high pressure and low pressure is where all the action is, where all the thunderstorms are, where all the wind is. So these events would be like high pressure, low pressure, but steroids. This would be beyond your wildest dream of wind while you have dust, gravel, rocks, and boulders falling from the sky, making it problematic unless you're in a cave on the leeward side of a mountain. And then the dust will blow right past you. If you're on the windward side of the mountain, you'll get buried in your cave. But if you're on the leeward side of the mountain, it's surprisingly survivable because the dust will blow past you. And a lot of times these people might have had warnings 5 or 10 years because they could see this thing coming. It was huge. And astronomers were their most valuable citizens.
Well, this is what I'm saying, that Russia and China is reporting that Nibiru's coming and that people are seeing it. They're taking pictures of it with their iPhones. Mostly you can only, what I'm seeing, you can only see it when the sun's coming up or the sun's going down. That's when you can catch it real good. But this is what they're saying. And the other thing that makes me very suspicious is the fact that all of these astronomers are mysteriously dying. There's 58 of them, and they're all being listed as suicides.
We've heard that before, haven't we?
Oh, yeah. Well, 58 people in the same profession are all going to kill themselves. I'm not buying it.
It's possible. It's not the direction I go in, and I try to keep an open mind, so I don't want to upset anybody, and it could be a factor, but I think that Venus, Mars, Saturn, Jupiter really take care of everything required. Maybe Nibiru, whatever the hell it is a factor, but it's not the path I go down.
Mhm. Okay, well, that's fine. But what you're describing that happened to the planet is what they're saying that's going to happen again.
All of these catastrophes were different. None of them were the same, and were really overdue. And these catastrophes tend to be very cleansing. Right now, all of our rivers run into the oceans and create dead zones. There's just too many people. They all defecate. So this event fixes that. And for old people like myself, it's no big deal. But for young people, it's really sad.
Yeah.
But these things seem to be necessary. The planet's insane. It's just polluted and crazy. Too many people. This normally is the answer. Something could show up tomorrow. Could be Nibiru. Could be a comet. It's like a pinball machine. All you need something to do is to bump into something else, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, anything, and that could start the ball rolling. And it might not come down for 50 or 100 or 1,000 years, or maybe nothing will happen for 1 million years, and everything will be fine.
Mhm.
It's hard to say, but there's a lot of different options for electrical catastrophes, and there's, again, many examples of catastrophes. Some cometary, some planetary, some gas giants exploding, possibly having novas, possibly ejecting Venus, either Jupiter or Saturn. Velikovsky was open to both options. It's hard to know for sure. This probably created almost all of the comets that we're dealing with, but there's fewer and fewer comets every year. The Romans recorded comets, and there were many more in the old days than there are now. It seems to be kind of cleaning itself up from this catastrophe, which makes
Well, you say we're overdue. You mean we're overdue because a debris field, we're overdue for a debris field to hit us?
It's been 28 years since a really big catastrophe. We've had the Carrington event in 1859. We had Tunguska. The Chicago fire was an electrical event, possibly caused by comet fragments, not just in Chicago, but in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Illinois. In Wisconsin, I think 35,000 people died in one of the fires. Granite and steel buildings melted. People ran out of their homes into fields with no fire and were killed. Their clothing and skin were fine, but in their pockets, their coins melted with no fire around them. That implies an electrical event with a charged cometary fragment coming through, creating an electrical phenomenon.
Well, what would that do to our electrical grid?
It would melt every single printed circuit. If you could melt a nickel or a dime, a printed circuit being 1/1500th as thick as your hair, they're all going to melt. Although this was localized. The Carrington event was a CME from the sun in 1859. NASA claims it would destroy every transformer. In 1859, it caught the telegraph system on fire. I think it burned the operators, their papers caught on fire. The telegraph system was like a giant antenna absorbing all of this electricity from the sun from a huge CME. If it were to happen today, we could lose the grid. If you lose the printed circuits in addition to that, you'd probably go back to Roman populations. Millions of people, not billions, because there's no infrastructure. There's no logistics. There's no water for irrigation. LA doesn't have any water. If you lose your printed circuits, you can't drive. No pumps to pump anything. Since 1980, every car is a printed circuit. So everybody in LA is stuck. No car, no gas, no water. As I like to say, the Crips and the Bloods will be the last one standing, and they probably can't make new transformers. So without these things that we take for granted, again, irrigation being a big one, both for food and for getting water to LA. The water in LA would probably be used up in a couple of days if you can't get trucks coming. So we've made ourselves vulnerable with the grid. The grid is incredibly vulnerable. It wouldn't take much to really throw a monkey wrench into the system that we take for granted. So we want to hope that this doesn't happen. It doesn't take an impact. It just takes charged fragments coming through the atmosphere. Again, as described by the Hebrews and the people in India. In India, they call them the Maruts. The Hebrews call them the terrible ones. Charged rocks. The noise was worse than anything. They're spinning in the sky. Probably similar to the stuff that would melt circuits. That was worldwide.
So do you feel that this electrical charge that's in our atmosphere are the sounds that people are hearing, like trumpets or booms?
Could be. Like there were noises during these events. Dr. Velikovsky points out that all over the world there were kings named Yahoo. He thinks that the current density was going up and down, creating something going Yahoo. But in the Hebrews apparently heard Yahweh. So if anybody were to mention that name, they'd stone you to death. So they took it pretty seriously. I think Om is probably from this. I can't bet on it or anything. It's not something you can know for sure. But there's a reason for all of these things that we do. The smells are probably similar to incense, not champa, myrrh, frankincense. It might have smelled like that. So people would try to recreate it because it was in their... People saw God in this. I don't. I'm an agnostic. I have questions about God. It may or may not be a factor in all these things. But the people affected saw God in the sky. They heard God. God was giving them commandments. God was speaking to them. So this really touched people to the point where they needed somebody to help them understand this in the form of a priest. And they'd do anything the priest said. They'd go out and kill anybody. If the priest says God wants us to kill somebody, who do you want us to kill? We'll kill them all. Men, women, children, dogs, cats, cattle, and you can't eat the cattle. That was the Hebrew version as they were wandering through the desert. Their priests told them that God wanted them to kill everybody, and they did. Everybody was acting kind of nasty. It seems like these electromagnetic events might make people kind of weird, sort of like the full moon or the Führen in Germany, the hot winds from the desert. It probably made them more aggressive. Armies were marching, brother versus brother. So it was a mess. It's amazing that humanity wasn't extinguished. My biggest problem with this is survivability, and some did. Oh, there was darkness for so long that there was no vegetation, no photosynthesis. So everything would have died after the herbivores were eaten. But miraculously, it appears there were carbohydrates as gas in the atmosphere. You have hydrocarbons, and you also have carbohydrates. And in the morning, when the dew would form, these carbohydrates would crystallize, and they looked like coriander seed, and they smelled sweet. And it rained down on the earth, all over the earth. And people gathered them up and could eat it. It was manna. And they talk about manna all over the world. And it is, unfortunately, a little bit miraculous. I apologize for that. I'm not invoking God, but it was really convenient that the herbivores were able to eat this manna. There was so much of it, you could only take 1 day's worth, except for Friday, getting ready for the Sabbath, because if you took more than 1 day's worth, you didn't have any confidence in God, because there was so much of it coming down. Again, I'm not religious. But it's really cool that the herbivores could live Now, the carnivores could feed on the herbivores who were feeding on the manna. But otherwise, without light, there's no vegetation. It took a while for the muck that was part of this process. And they talk about the muck a lot, according to our legend people, our mythologists. The valleys were full of wet ooze that didn't dry out. When it finally dried out, it was really fertile. And then they had a lot of vegetation. But prior to that, if it wasn't for manna from heaven, again, worldwide, everything would have died. So that was convenient.
How do you figure the people in the cave survived then, Michael?
Some of them talk about how it was a smorgasbord because the animals all came in and they're afraid. And most of the predators were not eating the other animals. The bones in these caves where there were survivors, actually not survivors, there were death. There's a cave in China with 3 different races of people. And all these different bones, all of this stuff is buried in gravel. It'd be really easy to have a barbecue if you have all these animals who are afraid and they're sheltering in the caves. Go over and kill a gazelle or whatever. So there weren't that many survivors. And yes, they had animals to eat. And then afterwards they had manna when they came back out of their cave. I don't know how long they would have to shelter in the cave. It wouldn't be continuous. It would be when the things were at their worst. So it wasn't a constant thing. It was kind of, it would go up and down in intensity. It was cyclical.
Well, what was happening with our volcanoes when this was all going on?
Every single one of them probably erupted. Every cinder cone, every volcano, because of the electrical nature of the events. There's something called telluric currents that go underground. Geologists use them to find oil. This event would have all kinds of electrical forces going to ground, going underground, probably causing every volcano to erupt, adding to the plague of darkness. So I should have mentioned earlier that volcanic dust would be a part of this process. I'm not a volcano denier, but there's just so many instances when volcanoes don't explain what's in the field, when there's basalt on the tops of mountains, not in the valleys. It doesn't look like it came from a volcano. And then when you read about what the geologists claim is the source of the basalt on the top of the mountains, it's like a comedy routine. It's like Abbott and Costello. I swear. And I take friends to BLM offices out west, Bureau of Land Management, and I ask the geologists to explain the missing volcano and all the basalt that had to evaporate in order for them to have a volcanic explanation. And when we come outside of the office, they're like falling down in the grass because they've been told a bill of goods. It's just silly. And they're getting this from geologists with degrees. But I have a couple of YouTube videos, Fabulous Disappearing Basalt, I was proud of that name, and Fabulous Disappearing Basalt number 2. The first one is Kingman, Arizona, just north of I-40 on a road cut. There's all this basalt. And you ask the geologists, and they say, well, it came from 40 miles or 50 miles to the east, and the basalt had to flow over a ridge and then an entire valley, all downhill. And then it covered this mountain that goes up really high, higher than where the missing volcano is. And then 40 miles of basalt has to evaporate. But the basalt that's actually there is pristine, like it was deposited yesterday, with zero erosion present. So they're making it up. And they have no choice because they don't have red-hot dust in their toolkit. And without that, you got to sit around on Saturday night and get drunk and start making stuff up. It's like, okay, where did the basalt come from? And everybody chips in, and they come up with stories that are nuts, and they admit that they're nuts. But it's the best they can do. It's funny. And it's like that with so many issues in geology, like the garnets and just oil and coal. None of it makes sense until you look at a catastrophic explanation, and then all of a sudden everything fits like a jigsaw puzzle. It's like, wow, I'm just sitting around Googling stuff. all day long, laying in bed. I feel like a slug. It's amazing what you can come up with. It's confirming of this. It's just out there, waiting to be stumbled upon. I stumble well. So, yeah, it's just, if I'm wrong, it'd be so obvious, and there'd be so many arrows pointing to it. But it seems like instead of that, there's just confirmation after confirmation. And I've got the links for everything. I've saved them all. So like Google bookmarks. So there's a lot of technical confirmation. And I'd like a geologist to explain dolomite. I'd like a geologist to explain these garnets. Again, some in the Himalayas with this incredible amount of depth required. There's so many things that I love to debate PhD geologists on, toe-to-toe. I don't think they can hurt me. They can't answer my questions. And at this point, I feel confident that with a couple of days, I can find answers to anything they're going to come up with. And it's logical. It all fits. It's all simple. Theirs couldn't be more complicated. So if you want to use Occam's razor, it's like, this is a lot more embraceable than their crazy story. Have you ever gone to a national park and sat in on a geology lecture?
No.
They're crazy. They're crazy. The stuff they tell you is just bizarre, and I would do it, and I'd walk away scratching my head going, I don't understand that. But it's not logical. It's not embraceable. Where what I'm proposing is very simple. It's not complicated, which is what science is supposed to be. If it's true, it shouldn't have to be convoluted. It should just be straightforward and follow a natural progression, which this seems to do.
Why do you think that they don't tell us the truth, or they make up things about it?
They're ignorant of plasma physics and electricity, along with cosmologists, and so many different fields in society. They made a wrong turn 60, 70 years ago, and they became gravity-centric. So they abandoned electricity, or they didn't know about it. Electricity was brand new back in the 1930s. Plasma wasn't even named yet. So they're ignorant of this, and the ironic part is a lot of them are Christians, and the Bible's sacred to them. The Exodus is the Word of God. But they think that's crap. And they'll tell you right to your face, that's not science, that's crap. I
don't know if they're ignorant of electricity because they're using HARP, and HARP is nothing but electricity. I think they know more than they let us know.
I'm familiar with HARP. HARP is electricity. But trust me, cosmologists are ignorant of electricity. Otherwise, they wouldn't require black holes, dark energy, dark matter. It's not necessary. They think that there's electricity in space, but it doesn't do anything, which is really hysterical. There is electricity in space. It's self-organizing. You can see it. They image it in X-ray, which is only made by electricity. M87 is a galaxy. It has coherent plasma, which is visualized in X-ray for 200,000 light years on either side of the galaxy. It's coherent. It doesn't just become diffuse gas. It's a Berkeley current, and it goes to the next galaxy. And all of the galaxies are connected by electricity, which is what creates the galaxy, creates the stars, powers everything. We are connected to this circuitry that goes from one end of the cosmos, the entire universe, to the other. Our DNA are in the same shape as the Berkeley currents that drive the package. And it's not a coincidence. We're connected to this while we're alive. And if I was going to be religious, I'd say this is it. This thing we're connected to, there could be something going on. But if I'm going to have a God, it's not going to be some guy with a staff. It's going to be these Berkeley currents that go from one end of the cosmos to the other. Some of our physicists think if you have a sincere question, this current circuit will provide you with an answer. I like that. It gives me peace and comfort. It might not be true, and it might be a little bit religious. I apologize if I'm offending anyone. But I feel a connection to these circuits that create everything. And they're on a scale that's hard to imagine. Some of them are 20 light years wide, and they're stars being made right in the middle of these Birkeland currents. You can see it. We have wonderful speakers at the Electric Universe conferences, Walt Thornhill, Don Scott, Dr. Don Scott, who talk about these things. Again, Thunderbolts info.
Well, I believe there is electricity in space because I've seen people take videos of UFO spaceships and there's like an electrical charge and then they appear.
A lot of the UFOs could be plasmoids, could actually be electricity that look like something glowing, that can move, that can maneuver, that can do all sorts of things. I'm not opposed to UFOs. I'm not opposed to extraterrestrials. Dr. Belikoski wasn't. With enough time, people can get real smart. We've only been working and flying for 100 years, and after 60 or so, we were going to the moon, or possibly. So the idea of being able to advance that far in that short of a period of time, if somebody else is around for 1 million years, what are they going to be capable of doing? So I'm open to it, but I'm not really married to it. I try to keep a real open mind. But a lot of the UFOs are probably electrical phenomenon. The thing over Phoenix with the big black wing that blotted out the stars, that's probably not plasma. I don't know what it is. I'm not taking sides one way or the other. But I'm open to extraterrestrials. I hope they're friendly. I hope they're nicer than the Europeans were to the Indians.
You're not familiar with Phil Snyder then, are you?
No.
Oh, you should watch some of his videos. He's dead. They killed him. And he was a engineer that worked the equipment that is building the underground bases that he says that we got this technology from extraterrestrials, that they made deals with the heads of the governments to be underground in our planet and experiment on humans, I guess, is what it was, and the governments would look the other way in exchange for technology. And he, in his video, he accidentally tunneled into their area with another soldier, and they came under attack by an extraterrestrial. And in the video, he shows where it cut 3 of his fingers off with a ray, like an electrical ray. He said all this thing did was take a circle around its chest, and it was like a ray came out and hit him, and he said it like blew him right open. It burned his toenails off his feet, and he says the only reason he was alive is that the soldier that was there with him when they came under attack pushed him back in the basket and hit the button. He sacrificed his life for him. But yes, he talks about and he had in his lectures, look him up on YouTube. It's Phil Snyder. In his lectures, he shows some of the material that they exchanged that's like rubbery, but it's metal.
I'll look into it, but this is not my focus. I'm really concentrated on geology. Other people can deal with the UFOs and all of that stuff, but I've got a limited time, and I'm really, really laser focused on what I'm doing, not all the other interesting things that are out there for us to look at and be awed by. So, yeah, I'm not opposed to this at all. I'm saying it's possible, open mind, but I'd like to get back to the geology of the rocks.
Yeah, sure.
And the things that are solid.
Well, the fact that they're drilling with this thing underneath the earth would affect geology, wouldn't you think?
Everything seems to have an impact. Fracking seems to affect geology with earthquakes and things.
Well, that's what they say what's happening in Oklahoma, They're having 4 and 5-point earthquakes because they're fracking.
Yes, in many places. What I find interesting about the shelters that they're supposedly building, Denver Airport and all these places, is that they're protected by a Faraday cage from the reading that I've done on them. So if there is an electromagnetic pulse, they would be protected. A Faraday cage is a metal box that's grounded that surrounds you.
I know what a Faraday cage is.
Okay, so yes, this protects you from a pulse, and apparently they're aware enough that things can happen electromagnetically that they're going out of their way to provide Faraday cages so that the people who are in these shelters might be protected from electromagnetic events.
Well, isn't that what will happen if we get peppered with the asteroid going by? It's gonna change the electromagnetic field.
You could have rivers of fire, was the way that the survivors described it. And they survived running to the caves. And the people who didn't run had serious problems. Lot's wife was turned to salt, which I think is minerals. She was probably zapped by plasma, destroying all of her water, leaving behind minerals. And they describe it so clearly. But you had to run to the cave. You couldn't dilly-dally. You had to get there quickly once these things started to happen. And they go out of their way to describe what that process was like. It was a mess. And we're still getting over it. Dr. Velikovsky's, he has a book which many people consider his greatest called Mankind and Amnesia. He was a psychoanalyst. He was communicating with Freud and Jung. And he feels that these events were so horrific, so much worse than Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq combined, that the people suffered from post-traumatic stress. And even though they had written versions of all of these events, instead of looking at them literally, they turned them into morality plays. And they suppressed the conscious memory of what happened. And according to the psychiatry world, when you suppress something, you then live it out in your life. And people, ever since these events, have had nothing but war. Every single opportunity one neighbor has to invade their other neighbor, they do it. And they're acting like animals. And apparently it might be because of mankind and amnesia. You got to deal with these things. You got to embrace them, and it kind of sets you free. And as long as you suppress them and go, oh, that's just bullshit, it tends to make you live it out in your life. Alexander cried comparing his exploits to Venus. It's very direct. They're trying to duplicate what Venus did because of the suppression of the conscious, of the historical event. So you take that with a grain of salt, but it is a very, very interesting book.
So I'll have to look it up.
Yeah, it's not a quick read, but it's really intense. People are nuts. They survive a tornado, and everybody else dies in this little town. And the next year, the siren goes off for the tornado, and you'd think that person would be the first one in the shelter. But they're walking around in the streets in a daze. They've got a short circuit in their brain. They're fried. They can't handle it. People have a limit on what they can consciously deal with. These events that I'm talking about were so far beyond that. And we are the children and the ancestors of these people. And it's important to embrace these catastrophes. Everybody could be dead tomorrow. Hopefully not. Maybe nothing will happen for thousands and thousands of years. But there's a chance things can be disrupted.
Mm-hmm.
You know, be comfortable with it. It's okay. It's just you can't do anything about it. Maybe you can build a shelter with a Faraday cage, but it's kind of limited. I would keep my eyes open for a nice cave.
Well, there is something going on that's affecting our planet, whether it's HAARP or whether it's what's coming at us and grabbing a gravitational pull, but our weather is extreme.
That's normal, though. Weather is never normal. There's, dark ages of Europe where they had no summers, no harvests. There was times in Greenland, which is not habitable. There were times when the earth was so warm they had farming in Greenland, which never happens. Eventually it got cold again and they all died. But the sun seems to drive weather electrically, and it gets hotter and colder, and the sun is doing its number right now. Apparently it's getting weaker, and we're in for a time of cooling, which is really dangerous because hot weather is good for crops. You have great harvest. CO2 is wonderful for crops. It's fertilizer. But cold weather, summers without crops, cause plague. People don't eat enough. They get sick. It's the big problem is cold, not heat. And according to Ben Davidson, suspicious observers, the sun is going into a weakening period. This is much more difficult for people than heating. So, yes, there's a variability to the electromagnetic events in the solar system, the galaxy, the universe, and we're connected to the entire thing. And the current density goes up and down. We were in a period of high solar activity, electrical. Now we're going into a period of low, and nobody seems to understand the consequences of that, with a few exceptions. Ben Davidson seems to know probably more about electric weather than just about everybody on the planet. He's got some associates that he works with. But yeah, they're looking at weather in a whole new way. It's really exciting, and I get to pick his brain every now and then. I really feel privileged. He and his buddies are working this stuff out. High pressure, low pressure, it's all electrical. It's a beautiful system. And you can affect weather with ion generators. In Mexico, they have ion generators that are creating more rain before they put them in. So if you emit ions from the surface, you can create thunderstorms. It's electrical.
Yes.
Russians are doing that in Mexico. It's really exciting.
Well, this is Tesla's work.
A lot of EU is Tesla. He's the master on so many levels, and it all is part of the fabric of the electric universe, plasma physics, and then it branches over into legend, catastrophe, and geology. But yes, everything is electrical. Every thought we're having is electrical. So yeah, it's an electric universe.
I agree. I think energy and electricity is a big factor of everything.
Yes. And fortunately, I stumbled on this community of electrical engineers and plasma physicists. I have a friend who's got a PhD in plasma physics. If I have a question, I can ask him. I have a friend who's an astronomer, an electrical astronomer. I can call him with a question. I had a geologist question me. He says, "Mother, your aurora can't answer rock. Rock requires pressure. All your aurora can do is heat." So I called my friend Mel Atchison. I said, "Mel, I need pressure. Some geologist is picking on me, saying it's heat won't fit the bill." And he goes, "Well, there's this thing with the Birkeland currents called a Bennett pinch or a Z pinch. And this would attract material, concentrate it, and compress it more than gravity could ever hope to. At the center of the Earth, there wouldn't be that much gravity. Electricity trumps gravity in almost every regard or every regard. So I'm so lucky that I can call somebody like this and get an answer." I then tried to get the PhD geology professor who attacked me to read some material about this. And he chose not to. He won. All you got to do is not read what's being proposed, and you can just ignore it. Doesn't mean anything. He told me comets were big icy chunks of water. And I'm there, no. There's a 9-part series by Walt Thornhill on electrocomet. Here, just read this. You can see that they're not ice balls. They're not from the Oort cloud. They're electrical. And he didn't read them. So he wasn't willing to do the groundwork that is required to understand what I'm proposing. Reading is required. YouTubes are nice, but the books are pretty cool too.
Well, that's what I saw on the History Channel, was that they didn't say all comets, but they said that the way water came to Earth was some of the comets that hit the Earth brought the water.
They're backing up on that dramatically. There's a process. You have the solar wind. As the comet gets closer and closer to the sun, depending on the charge of the comet and the conditions on the sun, you start to have hydrogen ions and electricity eating away at the surface of the comet. And a lot of what it's eating is silicon dioxide, which is about 40% oxygen. So now you have all this oxygen and hydrogen ions missing an electron. But they form with this newly freed oxygen, creating hydroxyl, HO, not H2O. And it's an ion, and it's not water. But it's been misconstrued by NASA and the comet experts as water. And apparently it has nothing to do with water. You might get a little bit of ice here and there. But Comet 67P doesn't have a great amount of water or ice. It's a giant rock. Comets are rocks, not ice balls. There's other ways for the Earth to get water. It started off with a mist, according to the really ancient times, the Garden of Eden, the Golden Age. It was misting all the time. No days, no nights, no seasons. It was really a nice place. And then you had huge amounts of deluges during the Great Flood, the Noah event. If that's true, maybe or may not be. It's back in the past. It's gray. So then you're going to get more water. And then I'm not sure exactly how we got to where we are now, but you don't need comets or asteroids or anything else to explain the water. There's other processes that can do that. There's water in a lot of places. Water is not that uncommon. So comets seem to have been a really convenient way to misconstrue everything. And the people who are the experts don't really know what's going on. And 67P is a huge factor in looking at this. And Comet Halley is a huge factor in looking at this. They're not ice chunks, they're rocks. And the hydroxyl confuses them, and it's just opened up a can of worms. So the dust is not water. Water doesn't make any sense.
Well, the one that hit Russia, they dug it out of the lake, and it was a big old rock.
A rock, yes, not an ice ball. So I don't think there's a lot of ice balls out there. And the way the comets behave, and they explode far out in space, this and that, the water being released by the heat of the sun doesn't wash. Again, I'll send you some links from Walt Thornhill. It's a 9-part series on the electric comet, or he's got a 1-part series on the electric comet. We got so much information about comets now because of 67P and predictions that were made. Before we went to Comet Tempel 1 and impacted with the 800-pound copper impactor, Walt Thornhill made all sorts of predictions, saying it would be an electrical event with 2 explosions, one prior to impact and another at impact, and they'd be huge. NASA said we might be able to see something, maybe not, a little puff of smoke, some dust. The event blocked out the sensor. It was so bright, it went to pure white, and it filled the atmosphere for days with dust. It was a huge electrical explosion that had nothing to do with ice, nothing to do with water, and it had everything to do with the copper projectile being charged differently than the comet. They approached each other so quickly, the projectile didn't have a chance to balance out its electromagnetic environment with the comet, so there were huge electrical events like Tunguska or the Chicago fire caused by this differential in charge between the impactor and the comet. So there's an awful lot of information in the Electric Universe archives by really smart people looking at comets as electrical animals And then Comet Venus would be the granddaddy, where it's just huge, and it's young, and it's really hot, electrically hot, charged, probably negatively compared to the Earth. So that's why you have these incredible events over Afghanistan. My YouTube is Pillar of Fire, Pillar of Smoke for Afghanistan, and then the mountains of Mexico and the Americas for the event over the Southwest U.S. But they're very large events. This is not something small, localized. This is mountains from Russia to Venezuela and from the Alps to the Himalayas.
Now, do you think that the electrical charges have anything to do with the increase of the earthquakes?
I think there's a definite correlation between earthquakes and electricity and X-rays from the sun. Ben Davis is doing wonderful work on coronal holes, more so than CMEs, and they emit X-ray, and after a coronal hole snaps and there's something of an expulsion of energy, it seems to increase the earthquakes. He's doing really groundbreaking research on this.
Yeah.
And he's suspicious observers. It's really easy to get to. I know so many people who they can't start their day without looking at Ben Davis's suspicious observer reports every morning. They're really fascinating. I find the earthquake reports to be the most spectacular. They're just cutting edge.
I keep the live earthquake map on 24/7.
It's interesting, and he follows them, and they seem to come after these coronal holes and snaps and filaments, not the CMEs per se from sunspots, but coronal holes and filaments. He can speak much better for his work than I.
How would I be able to look at his work?
Just go to Google and, or better yet, YouTube, and suspicious observers, and you'll bump into Ben Davidson, and he's a gift. He's
I'd
really
like to
smart.
check that out because I follow a lot of the earthquake and volcano activity. Are you familiar that a lot of the volcanoes that have been dormant for like 300 years have all been becoming active?
No, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
And it's going to be cyclical based on the sun, which is cyclical. So, yeah, it's all part of the package.
Yeah, there were 3 of them in one day that all went off at the same time.
Something you don't want to be around if at all possible.
No.
You should really try to interview Ben Davis. He'd be a wonderful guest for you. And
yeah.
He's really solid. He's got such a foundation that he's been working on now for some time. He's been driving around the country in an RV with his wife, and I went with him to Phoenix, Tucson, and San Diego, and the crowds are great. And people are just listening to every word. They're about to drive back to Ohio because his wife is with child, so they want to be at home for a while.
Mm-hmm.
They'll be back on the road with the mobile observatory, and they set up meetings to share their work. He just likes to share, and I can't get over the people that I stumbled on since I've been doing this project. I feel really fortunate.
Yeah, I would love to interview him.
He's got an open mind. He's changed a lot. He wasn't real comfortable with catastrophe when I first bumped into him.
Most people aren't.
I think what I've shown him in the deserts and the rocks, and then reading Worlds in Collision, and then looking at how they fit like a glove, he's become more comfortable with catastrophe. And he points out that these people who talk about the catastrophes, the legends, were incredibly intelligent. The Babylonians, they were really good at math. They did all kinds of trigonometry and physics. They were smarter than hell. And they're giving us these descriptions, again, all over the world, not just one group, but everybody the same basic story. You probably should listen to them. And then if it does fit with what you see, that's cool. If it doesn't fit with what you see, reject it. But when when you go out in the desert and you hear stories of molten dust, gravel, rocks, boulders, and you see conglomerate, and then all of a sudden the layer where the conglomerate, instead of the matrix being dirt, it's rock, solid rock with other rocks in it. Just like you'd expect if the stories are true. So it's really rewarding that all of these circles and arrows seem to be pointing in the same direction. If they don't, I back up, I'm wrong, I admit it and go down a different path. But for now, everything seems fairly tidy. I'm sure that in 5 or 10 years, people will have other ideas that this is going to morph and change. But right now, because of all these experiments that are being done, it's really a wonderful time in this catastrophic geology movement. And it'd be funny if it was correct.
I think you're correct. And I agree that we're overdue and that it will happen again.
Try to get to a cave. You could actually make a shelter. All you have to do is go into a cave and make an area that goes up that doesn't have air coming in. It's watertight. And you can survive a flood until the oxygen runs out. But you can make a cavity within a formation. There's tunnels all over the world under the cities. People were trying to figure out ways of surviving these things. You got to be watertight if there's a flood, and floods seem to be part of the fabric of these catastrophes. As soon as the Earth changes its motion, even without spinning in the opposite direction, if the Earth changes its motion, the waters go in the opposite direction. So without a slosh from the equator, you can still have horrific floods, as described.
Well, you're from Florida. There's a lot of underground caverns in Florida, correct?
I believe so. I'm not sure how survivable Florida would have been. It might have been a big problem. There's an awful lot of limestone that covers the entire state, and it's not a reef. It's limestone. And limestone is available from common dust. And it's funny because so often limestone has dolomite in it, and you ask it, oh, it's not dolomite, it's just limestone. And then you look it up, and it's actually rich in dolomite. So dolomite's sort of the poor sister. They tend to ignore it, but it's there. So, yeah, Florida would have been a problem. You would have probably wanted to go up into Georgia to get to the highest point you can, trying to escape the floods.
Yeah, so you're talking like up in the mountains.
Yes. And the highest you can get to, and then figure out which way the wind is blowing, and go on the leeward side of the mountain. Go to the side where the wind is going to push the dirt over your head, not cover you up. If you're on the windward side, you get covered. Leeward side, it's semi-survivable.
Well, myself personally, I'm in the same boat you're in. I've lived my life, and I'm not going to worry about surviving. But it's the children and the youngsters that, they have the plight of carrying on humanity.
I'm content. I've had an amazing life. I've been so lucky my entire existence. I've acted like a child and got paid for it. I was a photojournalist. I was able to fulfill any fantasy with 5 phone calls because people wanted me to come and take pictures of them. And I took advantage of it. And
I know. I was looking at some of the photos you have on your YouTubes, and they're beautiful.
They're not designed to be beautiful. Sometimes they are just because it was a nice place, but they're designed to be informational. I don't shoot at sunrise and sunset like you do when you're taking pretty pictures. I shoot at high noon with full sun, hopefully shining on what I'm shooting, front light, which is not beauty photography. The formations themselves are so amazing.
Yeah, I was watching how you were explaining what was going on with the photo, but still they were beautiful.
Thank you. But when I first started this, I was up in the Book Cliffs, north of I-70 in Utah, and it's famous for wild horses. And people come from Japan and Europe and everywhere to see these horses, and rarely do they see them. And I'm up there by myself, and there's 4 or 5 of them, like 100 yards away. And I got out of my car, and I looked at them for 8 or 9 minutes. And I got back in, and I didn't take a photograph because I was obsessed with the rocks. And then later I beat myself up, going, well, you're a photographer, you're an idiot, you disgust me because you didn't shoot this gorgeous scene. So later I saw a few wild horses and I took pictures of them just to sort of make up for my badness. And then shortly thereafter, I was driving by a place in New Mexico called Shiprock. It's sacred to the Navajo. They claim it's a spaceship, and their ancestors came out from under it. It's actually a welded tough formation that's part of this process. And there's about 12 wild horses running in the same direction that I'm driving. So I got out to take a picture, and it was messy. There's a fence, and it just wasn't clean. And the photographer, you want it to be clean. So I drove another mile and a half, and lo and behold, the horses keep running straight. I shoot it, and it still wasn't perfect. So I drive one more time, another cycle, and this time it's perfect. And Shiprock is in the background, and it's on my website. And it's a real special image. It's wild horses in front of one of the most interesting formations you can imagine. So I tried to make up for my laziness in the book cliffs, and I was given a gift. As a photographer, you don't make this stuff. It's given to you. All you got to do is be awake and conscious and have a camera and try to capture it simply without complication or distortion. Less is more. And I've been given gifts all my life of interesting things right in front of me. And then they pay me. It's like, oh, we're going to give you money because you saw something interesting. It's like, well, yeah, thanks, but it was really a gift.
Well, it sounds like better than pumping gas or working in a factory.
I pumped gas when I was 16, maybe 15, actually, and I determined that's not what I wanted to do. And I wanted to be Bob Cummings, the famous glamour photographer from the 50s TV show. Love that Bob. And it made me think it would be fun taking pictures. So I kind of pursued it after high school. My mom supported me, and I got a job at a newspaper, 1 in the morning until 9 in the morning. And sort of self-educated myself there, and then got photography in the Air Force. And then somehow or other, I kept getting hired at newspapers, even though I was a hippy-dippy doofus.
Sure.
I could see, and they could see that I could see. So even though I was a problematic employee in many ways, I was tolerated because I could see, and I wasn't lazy. I was really motivated. I felt honored and privileged to do this. I had a responsibility. I was the eyeballs of people who couldn't go out and see what I was seeing. So, yeah, this was my passion.
Yeah.
So the geology is really the same thing. It's just now my pictures are rocks, not baseball players or football players.
Okay, Michael. Well, for those that came in late, why don't you tell everybody how they can get to your website and a little bit about your videos that are up on YouTube so they can find out more about you and look at what you're trying to explain on your videos.
My main website is eu-geology.com. But if you Google EU, which stands for Electric Universe, although it's easier to think of Europe, if you just Google EU Geology without the dash or the .com, it'll come up. If you go to YouTube and search Michael Steinbacher, and your website has my spelling, you'll get everything I've done. You'll get my YouTube channel. You'll get Ben Davidson's interview with me. I did a talk in Albuquerque in March. It's 29 minutes and a couple seconds. I really hit all my points. It's a good, rapid overview. It has all of the information required, but rapidly. My YouTube channel, Michael Steinbacher on YouTube, gets into more detail of each point. There were a couple points I wasn't able to get to, like Zion Canyon, which is a really big deal because those canyons, I believe, were electrically excavated. And if you look at Google Maps, it seems like it's a no-brainer.
Hey, we got a guest that typed in, wants to know what is the web page again?
EU-geology.com or just EU Geology, space in between if you search it on Google. It's really really simple. And then Michael Steinbacher on the YouTube channel. If you search Michael Steinbacher, I'll come up at the top. If you get the YouTubes about some long snapper snapping footballs for football games, that's my nephew. That's not me. I don't snap punts. But yes, the stuff on geology at the top of the page is all about me. So Michael Steinbacher, Steinbacher. Michael is the normal one. And it's so nice to have YouTube. You can explain things using Google Maps and all these pictures I've taken.
Yeah.
And just talk over it. It's a wonderful repository of what I've learned. I'm so thankful to have it. And I think there's 19 of these things. I try to keep them short, around 5 minutes. Some of them go to 9, but they go by pretty quickly. It's kind of packed with stuff. It's not just crap that I'm spewing. So I've seen 6-minute videos that take forever. I think these go by quickly, I hope. And if it's true, it changes an entire science. Utterly. An entire science is overturned. Nothing that they teach is correct. It's all different, catastrophic, recent, no time for erosion. It's crazy.
Okay, Michael, we've got about 10, 15 minutes left. Is there anything in the last of the show that you would like to go over?
I think we've covered most everything really nicely. We've had a lot of time. Normally I talk to people for a half an hour, 45 minutes.
Yeah, I watched your one presentation that was about 30 minutes. I think you did well tonight. I think we learned a lot. It was very interesting, and we all want to thank you so much for coming out and educating us and all the work that you're doing to try to prove your theory.
I really appreciate the opportunity. People can contact me through EU Geology or EU-geology.com. They can ask questions, and I try to answer them. There's a comments section on the YouTubes. I try to answer them, at least if they're close to being in tune with what I'm doing. If it's really far out and different, sometimes I ignore them. Ben Davidson's video on me, which, again, you can find on the Michael Steinbacher YouTube page.
Mm-hmm.
People ask all sorts of questions there, and I try to keep up with them. Sometimes I'm away from Wi-Fi for a few days, so it gets a little complicated, but when I get back, I try to keep up. I appreciate people's interest, and I'm happy to answer questions if I can. My pleasure.
Thank you, Charles. Then we got a guest in the chat room that posted your webpage, EU Geology, and he also put up one of your YouTube videos, and he made a comment and said, Electric Universe is an excellent subject.
It's a wonderful way of looking at things with a different perspective. There's an awful lot of really intelligent folks that I use that educate me, and it changes the way you can look at almost everything. You don't need a volcano to make molten dirt. That's one of the big points. There's other ways to melt dirt in an electric universe. I love that sentence.
I think it's excellent. I have a caller real quick that wants to ask you a question, so let's unmute.
Please.
Welcome to the call, Arizona. You have a question for Michael?
Hi, Michael. I live in Tucson, and you said your friend had his lectures here. Arizona is really a fascinating state, as is New Mexico, and for geology, obviously. And I know this is going to sound very kind of dumb, but I've loved Texas Canyon and the City of Rocks and the up in Colorado, there's also formations that are like those, the Garden of the Gods. What kind of rocks are those, and are those created by the electrical circumstances that you were discussing?
Garden of the Gods is sedimentary rock, I believe. I don't think there's anything on the planet that wasn't created by these processes, both igneous rock, metamorphic rock, sedimentary rock, volcanic rock. Again, I do believe in volcanoes, so volcanoes can make some volcanic rock, so I'm not denying that. But just about all the mountains were made during this event. And there's no limit. Metamorphic rock seems to be in situ, not being starting at the surface and going down 20 miles and being squeezed and leached and all this stuff and coming back up again. It seems to happen right where you find it at the surface, electrically metamorphosed, which a geologist would never consider. So there's not a formation that I found that isn't airborne deposition. I'm open to folding mountains, but I haven't found one that leads me to believe that it was folded. These mountains have rivers going right through them that you could take an inner tube down, as if the river was there first, and then the mountain grew around the river while the river prevented accumulation. I can't tell you the number of mountains that have drainages going right through them. The Virgin River Gorge, it's actually in Arizona, is spectacular. The Grand Mesa in Colorado has these rivers running through them. The river would never have the ability to erode the canyon. There's not enough water available. There's a limited supply of water going up to the ridge. But the idea is if you have a drainage first while there's dust accumulating, you don't need to erode the canyon. You just need to prevent it while the area surrounding it grows with coal and other minerals in it that imply a cometary source.
Right. Yeah. Do you think that, and this is going to sound like another dumb question, but spontaneous human combustion, that would be electronic in origin, would it not?
I don't think I have a whole lot to add on that one. It could be, and fat burns real well. So, yeah, especially if you're a little chunky, I guess you can burn.
That's interesting. We should try to find out if there is a connection.
Well, it's more fuel. I'm too skinny to burn, I think.
Well, my thought on cremation is my last chance for a smoking hot body.
I wish to be fed to vultures myself, but everybody has their own little plan.
Okay, well, thank you, Arizona, for your input. Good questions.
And you have wonderful mountains there, the Catalinas and the Tucson Mountains. I have videos on that.
Yes, I lived in the Tucson Mountains for many years.
And they claim the Tucson Mountains were a volcano on top of the Catalinas that tiptoed across the desert 20 miles. It's crazy. It doesn't make any sense. It has nothing to do with the volcano.
No, it doesn't make any sense.
The Tucson Mountains are red-hot dust. The wind was blowing from the northeast. You can see the direction of the wind. You can see windward and leeward. I used to live in Las Lomas, just below Gates Pass, and I'd go up to Gates Pass and go, God, this is the most beautiful place in the world. What the hell caused this? And slowly, during the course of this work, it's like, gee, I think I know what caused this. I think it was red hot dust in the sky.
Wow, that's
misconstrued as a volcano. So please look at my YouTubes on the majestic Catalinas, because everywhere in Tucson you look, it's like, wow, there's the Catalinas.
Yes, that's true.
And then the Tucson Mountains, which are spectacular, melted basalt, but not from a flow, and not from the rim of a caldera on top of the Catalinas. I think that falls apart when you analyze it and become a little bit critical. It doesn't make sense, and the other explanation is simple.
Right. And Very interesting. Very interesting. I don't know that much about geology, obviously, but you have piqued my interest.
In a couple of weeks, if you look at the videos, you can know more about geology than a PhD professor.
Yeah.
It takes 8 years to learn the wrong material for a PhD professor. An incredible expense and memorization. In a few weeks, especially if you go out to the desert with me, you can see this process is so simple, and you'll know more than the PhD because their starting point is corrupt. So, yes, this is the most wonderful way to learn an entire science without spending all that money in 8 years of memorizing crap.
I'll have to check
Michael.
out your website for sure.
Thank you so much, Arizona. We got to get closed up here tonight.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Huh?
Did we fill up our 2 hours, Bad Baby?
We got about 8 minutes or 10 minutes left.
Okay. If there's any questions, that's fine. Talk out.
Charles, I want to thank you so much, Charles. He has been posting your YouTube videos up in the chat room and posting your name, and I think that he was surprised that you were out here tonight. He came in late, but he can always come back and listen to the recording.
I hope that many people do. Again, to learn this for yourself is just a waste. To learn this to share is such a joy and a dream. So that's my quest, is to inspire some 18-year-old or 14-year-old to make this their life's passion. And that would make my life worthwhile.
Well, we all have a purpose here, Michael, and we are very thankful for your input and your research and your time and the fact that you came out here and shared it with us tonight. And if you're ever in Michigan, take me on a tour.
The Upper Peninsula must be interesting. The only problem is you have all that damn vegetation. That's why Palm Springs, Vegas, Tucson, Phoenix, there's no vegetation. You can see the color of the rocks, the layers of the rocks, all the details of the rocks. Colorado's nice. You got to go to canyons to get rid of the vegetation, and you can see a lot of the processes, or you can get above tree line. But the deserts are really where it's at when the current density was high. So you have Nevada, Arizona, California, New Mexico. They're all perfect. And the winter's the time to go there. You don't want to go there in the summer. So it's a place
We have a
to go.
comment in the chat room, and it's from Charles. He says, Michael sounds great, humble, and sincere.
Thank you.
So you have entertained us.
But thanks anyway.
I am so glad that I found you, Michael. I really enjoyed the show tonight. And I'm going to call you in the morning and give you my email so you can send me out an email, and then I will shoot you back a copy of the recording.
I look forward to it.
Okay. Well, you enjoy the rest of your night, and I want to thank everybody for joining us.